speak to you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So I'm sure that you all have heard of Ireland's most famous patron saint, St. Patrick. Today I'm going to be talking to you about a lesser known, though equally as important saint from the Emerald Isle, St. Brigid of Kildare, whose feast day just passed on February 1st and is associated with our Candlemas celebrations. There are many stories and legends associated with St. Brigid, and there is even debate as to if she was even a real person. This is due to the fact that she shares the same name with a pre-Christian Celtic goddess, and many of the myths and associations of this deity have been ascribed to St. Brigid over the years. I personally have no doubt that St. Brigid was real, and whether all the stories associated with her are true or not is unimportant. It is the message and inspiration of faith that counts. So Brigid was born in the year 451 AD. Her father was a pagan chieftain of Leinster, and her mother was his bondswoman, a Christian who was baptized by St. Patrick. When her father's wife found out about his affair, she forced him to sell Brigid's mother to a druid while she was still pregnant. Thus Brigid was born into slavery. Legends of Brigid's holiness tell of her vomiting when the druid tried to feed her due to his impurity. Instead, she was sustained by a white cow with red ears. As she grew older, Brigid performed miracles, including healing and feeding the poor. According to one tale, as a child, she once gave away her mother's entire store of butter. The butter was then replenished in answer to Brigid's prayers. Around the age of 10, she was returned as a household servant to her father, where her habit of charity led her to donate his belongings to anyone who asked. According to one legend, her father was so annoyed with her that he took her in a chariot to the king of Leinster to sell her. While her father was talking to the king, Brigid gave away his jeweled sword to a beggar to barter it for food to feed his family. The king then recognized her holiness and convinced her father to grant his daughter her freedom. Soon after this, her religious life began. It is said that Brigid was veiled or received either by Saint Machael at Crowan or by Saint Miel of Arda. According to tradition, around the year 480, Brigid founded a monastery at Kildare. Kildare in Irish is Kildara, which means Church of the Oak. This was founded on the site of a pagan shrine to the Celtic goddess Brigid and served by a group of young women who tended an eternal flame. The site was under a large ancient oak tree. Brigid, with an initial group of 7 companions, is credited with organizing communal consecrated religious life for women in Ireland. She founded 2 monastic institutions, one for men and the other for women, and invited St. Conleth, a hermit from Old Connell near Newbridge, to help in Kildare as pastor of the institutions. Brigid's oratory at Kildare became a center of religion and learning, and Kildare developed into a cathedral city. For centuries, Kildare was ruled by a double line of abbot bishops and of abbesses, with the abbess of Kildare being regarded as superior general of all monasteries in Ireland. Brigid is also credited with founding a school of art in Kildare, which included metalwork and illumination that Conleth helped oversee. The Kildare Scriptorium made the Book of Kildare, a beautiful illuminated manuscript that contained all 4 Gospels of the New Testament, but unfortunately this book disappeared during the Reformation. According to Gerald of Wales, an archdeacon and historian from the 12th century, nothing that he ever saw was at all comparable to this book, every page at which was gorgeously illuminated, and the interlaced work and harmony of the colors left the impression that all this is the work of angelic and not human skill. Brigid was also very close friends with St. Patrick. In the Book of Armagh, a 9th century manuscript that contains early texts of St. Patrick, as well as one of the earliest copies of the New Testament produced by an insular church, there is a paragraph that reads, "Between St. Patrick and St. Brigid, the pillars of the Irish people, there was so great a friendship of charity that they had but one heart and one mind. Through him and through her, Christ performed many great works." The majority of the stories and legends associated with Saint Brigid center on her generosity to the poor, which she is most celebrated, though there are accounts of other miracles as well, which relate to healing as well as household tasks. She had a reputation as an expert dairywoman and a brewer. She was even reputed to have turned water into beer. It means she is Irish after all. So now I will recount just a few of the many stories of the miracles associated with Saint Brigid. On an occasion, when Brigid was traveling to see a doctor for a headache, she stayed at the house of a Leinster couple who had 2 mute daughters. The daughters were traveling with Brigid when her horse startled, causing her to fall and hit her head on a stone. Then a drop of Brigid's blood fell and landed on the girls and healed them of their muteness. Once, while on the banks of the river Inni, a woman gave her a gift of apples. Later, she was in a house of many lepers. They begged her for these apples, and she gave them to them. But the woman who had given the gift to Brigid in the first place became angry about this, because she said that she had not given the gift to the lepers. She had given it to Brigid. This in turn made Brigid angry. So she cursed the woman's fruit trees so that they would no longer bear fruit. Later, another woman gave Brigid the same gift of apples, and once again, Brigid gave the fruits to the begging lepers. This woman, instead of getting angry, asked that she and her garden be blessed. Then Brigid said that a large apple tree in the woman's garden would bear twice the amount of fruit, and this happened in the following season. One Easter Sunday, a leper went to Brigid and asked her for a cow. She said that she would help him later as she was resting at the time, but he said he didn't want to wait and that he would go and look for a cow elsewhere. Brigid offered to heal him from his leprosy, but the leper said that his condition allowed him to get more than if he was healthy. So she convinced him that this was not true, and she told one of her maidens to wash the man with a blessed mug of water. After she did this, the man was healed, and he vowed to serve Brigid. So probably the most famous of all Brigid's miracles is the time she went to ask the king of Leinster for land. While they were talking, she told him that the very place she stood was the perfect place for a convent, because it was beside a forest that would supply them with firewood and berries. There was a lake nearby for water, and the land was fertile for growing crops, to feed them. But the king merely laughed at her and said that he would not give her any land. So Brigid prayed and asked God to soften the king's heart. She smiled at him and asked if he would give her as much land as her cloak would cover. The king thought that she was joking, as a cloak is only a very small area, but however he agreed. Brigid told 4 of her sisters to take up the cloak, but instead of lying it flat on the ground, each of them with their face turned in a different direction began to run very fast, and the cloak actually grew, and it was spreading out over the land. It even began to cover many acres of land. The king became frightened. He asked Brigid what was going on, and she said that her cloak was covering his whole province to punish him for his lack of generosity to the poor. So he asked her to call her maidens back and told her that he would give her a decent plot of land. Soon afterwards, the king became a Christian and began to help the poor, and even commissioned the building of Brigid's convent. Brigid is said to have been given her last rites by Saint Nine when she was dying. Afterwards, he reportedly had his hand encased in metal so that it would never be defiled, and he became known as Nine of the Clean Hand. Tradition says that she died at Kildare on the 1st of February of 525. St. Brigid's flame was kept burning in Kildare's cathedral and tended to by a long line of her sisters in Christ until it was finally extinguished during the Reformation. In 1993, it was rekindled by the Brigidine sisters and is still kept burning and tended to by them in their religious center, Solis Brigid, in Kildare. So now that you know St. Brigid a bit better, what is all this saying? What is the take-home? Well, in true Irish fashion, I have put it into a triad, a traditional Celtic way of putting wisdom sayings into 3-part verses. So first, we can see that despite all odds against her, Brigid possessed an unyielding faith in God. She was born into slavery, yet still managed to become a great faith leader and establish the great cathedral city that became the Kildare we know today. She kept the faith through it all. Second, she was well grounded in the material world. She was a woman of great heavenly qualities, though she knew how to get things done in the earthly realm. She was steadfast in her prayer and monastic life, but she could also bring about material goods to provide for her community. We see this in her skills as a dairywoman, a brewer, and in her founding of a school of the arts that included metalwork, a valuable skill to possess in her time. Third, and perhaps the most important takeaway from Brigid's stories, is her habit of charity. Brigid never took anything for herself. From the earliest age, she gave away anything she could to help those less fortunate than herself. Every single one of Brigid's stories points to this in some way, from giving away her father's possessions when she was a child, all the way until her petitioning the King of Leinster for land. This is what we must remember about Brigid in this day, because we all have something to give, whether it be our material wealth, our time, our talents. We can all do something to help those less fortunate than we are. So to close this off, I will use a metaphor to help you remember this triad of Brigid's lessons. As I said earlier, Kildare means Church of the Oak, and the oak tree was a sacred tree to the Celtic people, and it's not hard to see why. Oak possesses some of the strongest unyielding wood on branches that reach high into the heavens. This can be seen as a symbol of Brigid's unyielding faith in God and his heavenly nature. The oak also possesses a great taproot that reaches deep into the earth for water and stability, symbolizing Brigid's grounded nature and the earthly skills she possesses. Finally, the oak tree produces an abundance of acorns that feed many creatures of the forest, symbolic of Brigid's charity and generosity. Is it a coincidence that Brigid founded her church under an oak tree? I don't think so. So let us remember St. Brigid and her Church of the Oak with the triad of unyielding faith, grounded earthliness, and charitable generosity as we go about our lives as Christian people of God. Amen.